you've probably had a demanding boss. But have you ever been fired by a centuries-old aristocratic vampire in a custom Prada suit? Clara Hayes thought her biggest problem was the crushing Chicago rent and a grueling corporate night shift. She had no idea her company was a front for the city's most dangerous supernatural syndicate. When the CEO's ruthless sister decided to clean house and demanded Clara pack her bags, her fate seemed sealed, that is, until the shadows in the room deepened. The private elevator chimed, and the boss himself stepped out to change her life forever. The 45th floor of the Croft building was a masterclass in modern corporate intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping, vertigo-inducing view of the Chicago skyline, but the glass was heavily tinted with industrial-grade UV protection. It was midnight on a Tuesday, and the office was humming with the quiet, frantic energy of the graveyard shift. Clara Hayes rubbed her tired eyes and stared at the glowing spreadsheets on her dual monitors. At 26, she was a senior logistics coordinator for Croft Financial, a title that sounded infinitely more glamorous than the reality of her day-to-day life. She was essentially a high-paid air traffic controller for the company's most obscure and heavily guarded shipments. Croft Financial wasn't a normal investment firm. They paid a 300% premium for night shift workers, provided full benefits, and covered all commuting expenses, but the rules were bizarre. There was a strict dress code, no silver jewelry allowed, supposedly because it interfered with the highly sensitive magnetic fields of their proprietary servers. The cafeteria had a permanent ban on any foods containing garlic or heavy spices, citing severe executive allergies. The ambient temperature was always kept at a brisk 62 degrees. And then there were the shipments. Clara managed the supply chains for a subsidiary called Hematech, importing massive quantities of specialized biomedical fluids, rare organic compounds, and synthetic plasma from Eastern Europe and South America. She didn't ask questions. She couldn't afford to. Her father's medical bills and her own mountain of student debt made the Croft salary a lifeline she couldn't sever. "Hey!" A soft voice broke Clara's concentration. It was Jenna Lewis, a junior analyst who sat 2 desks down. Jenna was shivering, a thick wool cardigan wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She held a steaming cup of chamomile tea, her eyes darting nervously toward the frosted glass doors of the executive suite. "You're staring at the numbers so hard they're going to start bleeding," Jenna whispered, pulling up a chair beside Clara's desk. "Take a break before your retinas detach." Clara managed a weak smile, stretching her stiff neck. "I can't. The routing for the Bucharest shipment got delayed in customs. If I don't clear the manifest by 2 a.m., the cargo spoils. And you know how upper management gets about spoiled cargo." Jenna shuddered. "Don't remind me. Remember what happened to Greg in accounting last month? He screwed up the refrigeration logistics for a warehouse in Prague. The next night, he was just gone. HR said he took a sudden sabbatical, but he left his favorite coffee mug and his house keys on his desk." "Greg was sloppy," Clara said, though a cold knot tightened in her stomach. She had noticed Greg's disappearance too. "Croft Financial doesn't tolerate mistakes. You know that when you sign the non-disclosure agreement." "I know, but the vibe here—" Jenna leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a barely audible murmur. "It's not normal, Clara. Have you ever actually looked at the executives when they walk through? The board of directors? They don't walk, they glide. And Mr. Croft—" Clara's fingers paused on her keyboard. Lucien Croft, the CEO, the billionaire enigma who had built the company from the ground up, though rumors suggested his family's wealth was centuries old. Lucien only worked from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. He was a phantom, an imposing figure of terrifying authority, who rarely spoke directly to the floor staff. The few times Clara had seen him, she had been struck by an overwhelming primal sense of danger. He was impossibly tall, with raven black hair, tailored suits that fit perfectly over a broad, muscular frame, and skin that looked like polished marble. But it was his eyes that haunted her, a piercing, luminescent amber that seemed to strip away every defense a person had. "Mr. Croft is just intense," Clara said, trying to sound dismissive. She turned back to her monitor. "He demands perfection, and frankly, for what he's paying us, he's entitled to it." "He doesn't blink, Clara," Jenna insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "I dropped a file folder near the elevator yesterday when he was standing there. He moved so fast to catch it, it was a blur. Human beings don't move like that. He's a billionaire, Jenna. They probably have him on experimental biohacking diets and stem cell therapies," Clara reasoned, though she didn't fully believe her own words. "Just finish your quarterly projections. We have 2 more hours until lunch break." Jenna sighed, clutching her tea, and rolled her chair back to her desk. Clara took a deep breath and plunged back into the Bucharest manifest. The cargo was listed as medical supplies, Class A organic. She needed to expedite the release through customs using the company's diplomatic channels. As she typed the authorization codes, she felt the familiar prickle of unease that always accompanied the Hematech files. The sheer volume of liquid they were transporting didn't make logistical sense for a standard biomedical firm. It was millions of liters. But Clara was a survivor. She compartmentalized the strange shadows in the corners of the office, the impossibly silent footsteps of the security guards, and the unnerving perfection of her employers. She kept her head down, did her job flawlessly, and collected her paycheck. She thought her flawless record made her untouchable. She was about to find out how wrong she was. The clock on Clara's monitor clicked to 11:45 p.m. The soft, rhythmic hum of the servers and the rapid clicking of keyboards were the only sounds on the floor. Then the chime of the private executive elevator echoed through the room. It was a sharp, piercing note that instantly made every spine in the room go rigid. Lucian Croft rarely left his office before 3 a.m., and when he didn't use the main floor elevator. The heavy steel doors slid open with a soft hiss, but it wasn't the CEO who stepped out. It was a woman. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with platinum blonde hair styled in a sharp, asymmetrical bob, and a crimson designer trench coat draped over a tailored black dress. She wore stiletto heels that clicked against the hardwood floor with the finality of a judge's gavel. Like Lucian, she possessed an otherworldly aura, a predatory grace that commanded absolute, terrified attention. But where Lucian's presence was a heavy, suffocating silence, this woman's energy was a chaotic, burning wildfire. Clara recognized her from the company directory. Victoria Croft, Lucien's sister, and the chief operating officer of their European division. She was rarely in Chicago, and her unannounced presence sent a shockwave of panic through the night shift. Victoria strolled to the center of the bullpen, removing a pair of black leather gloves, finger by finger. Her eyes, a sharp, icy blue, scanned the room, lingering on the terrified faces of the employees like a hawk evaluating a field of mice. "This branch is a disgrace," Victoria announced. Her voice was musical, cultured, with a faint, untraceable European accent, but it carried perfectly across the massive room. "It reeks of mediocrity and cheap coffee." Two executives in immaculate grey suits hurried out from the side offices, bowing their heads subserviently. "Ms. Croft," one of them stammered, "we weren't expecting you. Your brother—" "My brother is too lenient," Victoria interrupted, not even looking at the man. She ran a single, perfectly manicured finger along the top of a filing cabinet, inspecting it for dust. "I am conducting an impromptu audit. The London branch operates at 99% efficiency. This pathetic excuse for a logistics hub has been lagging." She began to walk down the aisles of desks. "You," Victoria snapped, pointing at a mid-level manager named David. "Your tie is crooked, and your heart rate is erratic. It's annoying. You're fired. Get out." David froze, his face draining of color. "Ms. Croft, please, I have a family." "Security," Victoria said softly. Two massive men, in dark suits, stepped out of the shadows near the stairwell. They hoisted David out of his chair by his armpits and dragged him toward the exit. The rest of the office watched in paralyzed horror. Victoria continued her march. She fired a receptionist for wearing perfume that gave her a migraine. She fired an IT technician because she didn't like the sound of his breathing. She was a hurricane of entitlement and cruelty, tearing through the floor with terrifying efficiency. Clara kept her head down, her fingers flying over her keyboard. "Don't look at her. Make yourself invisible. Just focus on the Bucharest files." But the clicking of the stilettos was getting closer. It stopped directly behind Clara's chair. The temperature in Clara's immediate vicinity seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. She could smell Victoria's perfume, something sharp, metallic, and heavily floral, like roses blooming over copper wire. "What exactly are you supposed to be doing?" Victoria's cold voice drifted over Clara's shoulder. Clara swallowed hard, forcing her hands to stop trembling. She turned around in her chair, maintaining a respectful but neutral expression. "I am expediting the clearance for the Hematech shipments out of Bucharest, Ms. Croft," Clara said evenly. "We hit a customs snag, but I am routing the authorizations through the diplomatic tier." Victoria's icy blue eyes narrowed. She leaned in closer. "Hematech? You are a human managing the blood." She stopped herself, her lips curling into a cruel smirk. "Managing the biomedical logistics for our private reserves. I am the senior logistics coordinator for that account?" "Yes," Clara replied. "Unacceptable," Victoria scoffed, standing up straight. "Those files are highly classified. They contain routing numbers and secure location data for our most vital assets. Hand over the master ledger." Clara hesitated. The master ledger was the holy grail of her job. It contained every drop point, every bribe, every shadow corporation front used to move the cargo. "I apologize, Ms. Croft, but I cannot do that," Clara said, her voice remarkably steady, despite the terror pounding against her ribs. The entire office went dead silent. Jenna gasped from 2 desks away. Victoria slowly tilted her head. "Excuse me? What did you just say to me, little girl?" "Protocol 4A of my employment contract," Clara stated, reciting the rules she had memorized on her first day. "The Hematech master ledger is restricted to the CEO's direct clearance. I am forbidden from transferring custody of the ledger to anyone, including board members, without the explicit written authorization of Lucian Croft." Victoria's face twisted into a mask of pure fury. The whites of her eyes seemed to flash for a fraction of a second, revealing a terrifying, blood-red rim around her irises. She slammed both hands onto Clara's desk, the impact cracking the thick mahogany surface. "You dare quote human paperwork to me?" Victoria hissed, her voice dropping to a demonic, vibrating register that rattled the pens in Clara's organizer. "I am a Croft. I own this building. I own the air you breathe in this room. You are nothing but cattle typing on a keyboard." Clara shrank back, genuine fear finally breaking through her professional facade. The sheer, unnatural strength it took to crack the heavy desk was impossible. Jenna was right. They weren't human. "I am doing my job," Clara said, her voice shaking now. "If you want the ledger, please ask your brother to authorize the transfer." Victoria laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "My brother isn't here to protect you, little mouse. I am cleaning house, and I have zero tolerance for insubordination from the livestock." Victoria stood up, smoothing down the front of her designer dress, her composure returning to a state of icy superiority. "You're fired!" Victoria declared loudly, making sure the entire floor heard her. "Pack your pathetic little desk. You have exactly 10 minutes to vacate my building. If you are still here in 11 minutes, I will have security throw you through the glass." The words hung in the air like an executioner's axe. "Fired." Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. Her mind raced to the final notice on her father's physical therapy bills, the staggering rent due on the first of the month, the massive mountain of debt she had been slowly chipping away at. The Croft salary was the only thing keeping her family from drowning. "Ms. Croft, please," Clara said, her voice cracking. "I have a flawless record. I've saved this company millions in routing delays. 9 minutes and 40 seconds, Victoria interrupted, checking a diamond-encrusted watch on her wrist. She turned her back on Clara and signaled to the 2 massive security guards. "Make sure she takes nothing but her personal effects. If she tries to copy a single file, break her fingers." Victoria stalked away toward the break room, intent on continuing her reign of terror. Clara stared blankly at her cracked desk. Tears burned the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her break. With trembling hands, Clara reached under her desk and pulled out a standard cardboard banker's box. She began mechanically packing her life away. Her framed photo of her and her dad at Lake Michigan, her favorite ergonomic mouse, a small, sad succulent she had managed to keep alive under the fluorescent lights. Jenna slid over in her chair, her face pale and streaked with silent tears. "Clara, I'm so sorry," Jenna whispered frantically. "This is insane. She can't just do this." "She just did," Clara replied, her voice hollow. She dropped a handful of pens into the box. "Don't talk to me, Jenna. If she sees you sympathizing with me, she'll fire you too. Just keep your head down." "But what are you going to do?" "I don't know," Clara admitted, the crushing reality finally settling over her chest. "I really don't know." She logged out of her terminal, the screen going black, severing her connection to the lifeblood of Croft Financial. She had 3 minutes left. The 2 massive security guards were already looming at the end of her aisle, their arms crossed, watching her every move. Clara hoisted the heavy cardboard box into her arms. She took one last look at the Chicago skyline through the tinted glass, took a deep breath, and turned to walk down the aisle of desks toward the exit. Every eye in the office was on her, pity, fear, and relief that it wasn't them. As Clara reached the center of the room, exactly halfway between her desk and the exit, the air pressure in the room suddenly shifted. It was a physical sensation, like the moment before a massive thunderstorm breaks. The ambient hum of the servers seemed to die away. The temperature, already cold, plummeted to freezing. Clara's breath plumed in a faint white mist before her face. The private executive elevator chimed again. This time the sound didn't just make people tense up, it made them stop breathing entirely. The heavy steel doors slid open. Lucian Croft stepped out. He was a terrifying vision of power and ancient authority. He wore a bespoke 3-piece midnight blue suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His tall, broad-shouldered frame moved with absolute, silent grace. His raven black hair was perfectly styled, framing a face of agonizing, aristocratic perfection. But it was his eyes that seized the room. They were burning, a brilliant, terrifying amber that seemed to glow in the dim light of the office. He radiated an aura of lethal, coiled violence. The entire office stood up in unison. Even the security guards lowered their heads, refusing to meet his gaze. Lucien didn't look at the executives. He didn't look at the security guards. His burning eyes locked instantly onto Clara, standing in the middle of the floor, holding her pathetic cardboard box. Victoria emerged from the break room, looking momentarily surprised before her face smoothed into a confident smile. She walked toward her brother, her heels clicking loudly in the dead silence of the room. She spoke to him in a language Clara had never heard before, something guttural, fluid, and impossibly ancient. It sounded like Latin mixed with the grinding of stones. Lucien didn't look at her. He raised a single gloved hand. Victoria snapped her mouth shut instantly. Lucien walked slowly across the floor. Every step he took seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The crowd of employees parted like the Red Sea, pressing themselves against their desks to give him a wide berth. He stopped a few feet in front of Clara. Up close, the sheer magnitude of his presence was intoxicating and terrifying. He smelled of rain, old parchment, and something metallic and sharp. He looked down at the cardboard box in her arms. Then he looked at her face, his amber eyes scanning her flushed cheeks, her trembling hands, and the faint sheen of unshed tears in her eyes. Ms. Hayes, Lucien's voice was a deep, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate directly in Clara's chest. It was calm, but entirely devoid of warmth. "Why are you holding a box?" Clara swallowed hard, her throat bone dry. I was packing my things, Mr. Croft." Lucien's eyes flicked to the side, finally acknowledging his sister. "And why are you doing that?" Victoria stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "I am handling a severe disciplinary issue, Lucien. This branch is a mess. I am restructuring the floor. The human was insubordinate. She refused a direct order to hand over the hematech ledgers. I fired her." The silence that followed was so profound, Clara could hear her own frantic heartbeat thumping in her ears. Lucien slowly turned his head to look fully at Victoria. The air around him seemed to darken, the shadows stretching and contorting along the walls. "You fired my logistics coordinator," Lucien stated. It wasn't a question. "She is entirely replaceable," Victoria scoffed, though Clara noticed she took a half step back. "I will have one of our thralls from the London office take over by tomorrow evening. She dared to cite protocol to me. She needs to be taught a lesson in hierarchy." Lucien looked back at Clara. For a fraction of a second, his amber eyes softened, shifting to a deep, mesmerizing gold. He reached out and gently placed one large, cold hand over Clara's, which were gripping the edges of the box. "Put the box down, Clara," he said softly. Clara was too stunned to move, but his gentle pressure guided the box out of her hands, letting it drop to the floor with a heavy thud. Lucien turned his body, shielding Clara from Victoria's view. He stared down at his sister, and the mask of the corporate CEO slipped, revealing the ancient, terrifying apex predator beneath. When he spoke, his voice was a quiet, lethal rumble that carried a threat so absolute it made the security guards flinch. "You will not restructure my floor," Lucien said, his eyes flashing a dangerous blood red. "You will not touch my files, and you will certainly not terminate my staff." Victoria's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear crossing her flawless face. "Lucien, she is just a human. She is my employee." Lucien cut her off, taking a step toward his sister, forcing her to back up. "And she followed the protocol I put in place to keep those ledgers out of the hands of careless, meddling board members like you." He turned back to the room at large, his voice rising to command the entire floor. "Everyone else in this room whose name does not reside on my personal payroll is dismissed for the evening. You will leave this building immediately." He looked at his sister, a cruel, mocking smile playing on his lips. "That includes you, Victoria. Get out of my city." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, but the murderous intent radiating from Lucien silenced her. Humiliated and furious, she spun on her heel and stormed toward the elevators, the two security guards hastily following her out. The rest of the floor erupted into chaotic, panicked movement as the remaining night shift workers grabbed their coats and bolted for the exits, eager to escape the suffocating tension. Within minutes, the massive 45th floor was completely empty, except for Clara, standing frozen in the middle of the aisle, and the towering, terrifying vampire king standing before her. Lucien looked down at her, the dangerous red fading from his eyes, returning to that piercing, luminescent amber. He looked at the cracked desk in the distance, then back to her. "I apologize for the disruption, Ms. Hayes," Lucien said, his voice returning to its smooth corporate calm. He casually adjusted his cufflinks. Clara stared at him, her mind reeling, trying to process what had just happened. "So, I'm not fired?" Lucian stepped closer, violating her personal space, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Fired?" he whispered, a strange, possessive gleam in his eyes. "Hardly, Clara." He leaned in, his cold breath brushing against her ear. "She tried to clear the floor," Lucian murmured, sending a shiver down Clara's spine. "But you're the only one staying." The silence that followed Lucien's words was absolute, heavy enough to crush the breath right out of Clara's lungs. The vast expanse of the 45th floor, usually vibrating with the frantic energy of dozens of employees, was completely desolate. Outside the heavily tinted glass, the amber streetlights of Wacker Drive blurred into the dark, churning waters of the Chicago River, painting the city in a muted, melancholic glow. Lucian Croft took a slow, deliberate step back, giving Clara the space her racing heart desperately needed. He reached down and effortlessly lifted the heavy cardboard banker's box with one hand, setting it gently on the nearest pristine desk. "Breathe, Ms. Hayes," he instructed, his tone shifting from the lethal rumble he had used with his sister to a smooth, almost hypnotic cadence. "You are hyperventilating." Clara placed a trembling hand flat against her chest, forcing herself to draw in a long, shaky breath of the frigid office air. I just stood up to the chief operating officer of Europe. She was going to throw me through the window. "Victoria is prone to theatrics," Lucien said dismissively, brushing a speck of invisible dust from the lapel of his bespoke suit. "She relies on terror because she lacks the intellect for actual leadership." However, she was right about one thing. Clara froze, her blood turning to ice. "Sir, this branch has grown complacent," Lucien murmured, turning his golden, luminescent eyes toward the shattered remains of Clara's mahogany desk. "My executives are weak, easily bullied by a European upstart. Yet my senior logistics coordinator, a human making a fraction of their salary, looked a 500-year-old predator in the eye and cited corporate protocol." A low, rich chuckle rumbled in his chest, a sound that was somehow more terrifying than his anger. "I find that immensely fascinating." "I needed the job, Mr. Croft," Clara admitted, the raw honesty spilling out before she could filter it. "My father is receiving experimental oncology treatments at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The Croft insurance policy covers 80% of the out-of-network costs. If I lose this job, he loses his treatment. I couldn't just hand over the Hematech ledgers and risk termination for a security breach." Lucian's expression remained unreadable, but a flicker of something ancient and calculating crossed his features. He moved toward her, his footsteps entirely silent on the hardwood floor. "Desperation breeds either catastrophic failure or extraordinary resilience," Lucian observed, stopping just an arm's length away. "You have demonstrated the latter, but you will no longer work on this floor, Clara." Panic flared anew in her chest. "But you just said—" "I said you are the only one staying," Lucian corrected, his voice dropping to a velvety whisper. "This floor is for the rank and file. It is for cattle, as my dear sister so crassly put it. You, however, have proven that you possess a spine made of something significantly harder than bone." He reached into the breast pocket of his suit and withdrew a sleek black keycard embossed with a minimalist silver C. He held it out to her. "Effective immediately. You are promoted," Lucian stated, his eyes locking onto hers, demanding her absolute compliance. "You are no longer a senior logistics coordinator. You are my executive liaison. You will work directly out of my suite on the 50th floor. Your salary is quadrupled, retroactive to the beginning of this fiscal quarter. Furthermore, I will personally guarantee your father's medical debts at Northwestern Memorial are paid in full by sunrise." Clara's jaw dropped. A quadruple salary, her father's crushing debt gone in a matter of hours? It was a miracle, a terrifying Faustian miracle, wrapped in a midnight blue suit. "Why?" Clara whispered, afraid to reach out and take the card. "I just route biomedical shipments. Why do you need me up there?" Lucian leaned in, the scent of rain and cold iron washing over her. "Because, Ms. Hayes, the shipments you route are not merely biomedical," he said softly, "and the war my sister is trying to start within my company requires someone who understands human logistics, but cannot be compelled by vampire glamour. Your mind is remarkably guarded. I need someone who follows my rules entirely." He reached out, taking her trembling hand, and pressed the black keycard into her palm. His skin was freezing, like polished marble left out in the winter snow, but the touch sent a sharp, electric jolt up her arm. "Gather your box, Clara," Lucian commanded softly, stepping away and walking toward the private executive elevator. "We have a great deal of work to do before the sun comes up." The private elevator ride was a masterclass in suffocating silence. Clara stood rigidly in the corner, clutching her cardboard box to her chest like a shield, while Lucien stood in the center, a towering monolith of dark power. When the doors slid open with a soft chime, Clara stepped into a world that made the luxury of the 45th floor look like a cheap motel. The 50th floor was Lucien's private sanctum. It was a sprawling, open-concept masterpiece of dark mahogany, black marble, and brushed steel. Massive, untinted floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed, dizzying view of the Chicago skyline. A massive fireplace roared against the far wall, casting dancing orange shadows across the room, though it did nothing to warm the freezing ambient temperature. "Your new workspace," Lucien said, gesturing to a massive curved desk made of obsidian glass situated just outside the heavy double doors of his inner office. Atop the desk sat a state-of-the-art multi-monitor setup, a secure encrypted phone line, and a fresh cup of coffee that was still steaming. Clara set her box down, her eyes wide as she took in the opulent surroundings. There was an original Caravaggio painting hanging on the wall near the private kitchenette, and the faint classical strains of a cello playing softly through hidden speakers. "Sit," Lucien instructed, walking past her and pushing open the heavy mahogany doors to his private office. "Log in using your new credentials. The password is on the screen." Clara obeyed, sinking into the plush leather chair. It molded perfectly to her back. She typed in the temporary password displayed on the main monitor. Instantly, the screens flared to life, bypassing the standard Croft financial intranet and dropping her directly into a heavily encrypted mainframe labeled Project Aegis. Lucien stepped back out of his office, having discarded his suit jacket. He wore only a fitted black dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal pale, muscular forearms corded with veins. He walked over and leaned over Clara's shoulder, bracing one hand on the edge of her desk. "Open the unredacted Hematech files for the Bucharest shipment," he murmured, his face so close she could feel the cold radiating from him. Clara's fingers flew across the keyboard. She pulled up the exact manifest she had been fighting with an hour ago, but it looked entirely different. The corporate jargon and biomedical coding had been stripped away. She stared at the screen, her blood running cold as the reality of the data finally hit her. Cargo, synthesized Vitae, Class S, volume 400,000 liters. Destination, the Carpathian Syndicate, formerly known as the Dracul faction. Status, intercepted by hostile actors. "Synthesized Vitae," Clara read aloud, her voice trembling. She looked up at Lucien's imposing profile. "It's not organic plasma for hospitals. It's blood. It is a highly stable, genetically engineered blood substitute," Lucien corrected, his golden eyes fixed on the glowing monitor. "Croft Financial is not an investment firm, Clara. We are the largest supply chain in the supernatural world. We manufacture and distribute synthetic sustenance to vampire factions across the globe." Clara's mind raced, struggling to process the impossible truth. "Why? To keep them from eating people," Lucien said bluntly, looking down at her. "For centuries, our kind hunted yours. It was messy, barbaric, and drew the attention of human hunters. 100 years ago, I realized that modern capitalism offered a better solution. Why hunt in the shadows when you can have a clean, untraceable food source delivered to your door?" He tapped the screen with a long, pale finger. "Hematech creates the substitute. Croft Financial handles the logistics, hiding the massive movement of liquid capital behind biomedical shell companies. I feed the global vampire population, and in return, they abide by my laws. No hunting humans, no exposure." "But the Bucharest shipment is intercepted," Clara noted, her logistics training kicking in despite her terror. She pointed to a flashing red icon on the map. "Customs didn't hold this. It was hijacked." Lucien's eyes narrowed, a flash of red bleeding into the gold. "Exactly. My sister Victoria believes that synthetic blood makes us weak. She is a traditionalist. She has been quietly amassing a rogue faction in Europe, intercepting my shipments to starve the local covens, forcing them to return to hunting humans." Clara felt sick. If they start hunting in Europe... "It breaks the masquerade," Lucien finished grimly. "Humanity will discover us. War will break out, and Victoria will position herself as a savior, leading a slaughter against your kind. I cannot allow that to happen." He stepped back, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "She came here tonight to steal the master ledger from you. If she had the routing algorithms, she could intercept every shipment we send globally. She would cripple my empire in a week." "Because I cited protocol, she couldn't get it," Clara realized, a sudden wave of vertigo hitting her. "She couldn't just compel me." "No," Lucian said, a hint of dark amusement returning to his voice. Ancient vampire treaties, forged long before corporate law existed, dictate that assets entrusted to a human thrall or servant cannot be forcefully seized by a rival vampire without an act of formal war. By strictly adhering to the bureaucratic rules I wrote, you essentially invoked a medieval blood pact. You legally blocked a 500-year-old predator with a compliance manual. Clara stared at the screen, the weight of the situation crashing down on her. She wasn't just moving boxes anymore. She was managing the fragile peace treaty between humanity and monsters. "What do you want me to do?" Clara asked, her voice remarkably steady. Lucien's predatory smile widened, flashing a pair of elongated, brilliantly white canines. "I need you to restructure the entire global supply chain by dawn," Lucian commanded. "Reroute every shipment using human-level diplomatic channels that Victoria's vampires cannot legally touch. You are going to help me starve her rebellion, Ms. Hayes, and if you succeed, I will make sure you are the most powerful human in this city." Clara looked back at the monitors, the red, flashing lights of the intercepted shipments illuminating her pale face. There was no going back to the 45th floor. The shadows of Croft Financial had swallowed her whole, and her new boss was the king of the dark. New rules of engagement. Rule 1, trust no one in European management. Rule 2, all routing must be masked behind human-grade diplomatic immunity. Rule 3, never leave the 50th floor without Lucian's personal security detail. Clara cracked her knuckles, the sound loud in the cavernous office. "I'm going to need more coffee." The 50th floor of the Croft building was a silent sanctuary. The only sounds, the furious clacking of Clara's mechanical keyboard and the steady, rain-like drumming of the Chicago winds against the reinforced glass. It was 1:15 a.m. Clara's monitors were a chaotic sea of spreadsheets, global shipping routes, and real-time GPS tracking data. Rerouting 400,000 liters of highly sensitive, temperature-controlled synthetic blood wasn't a matter of simply changing a shipping label. It required specialized cold chain logistics, specifically ISO-certified refrigerated shipping containers known as reefers, and absolute discretion. Victoria's rogue faction was intercepting the shipments by infiltrating the private maritime security firms that Croft Financial usually employed. They couldn't steal the cargo legally, so they were initiating hostile boarding maneuvers in the Mediterranean and the North Sea, slaughtering the human crews and claiming the cargo was lost at sea. Clara rubbed her burning eyes. Think, how do you move something across international borders without letting security contractors or customs agents get near it? Your heart rate is elevating to 110 beats per minute. Lucian's smooth, resonant voice broke her concentration. Clara jumped slightly in her ergonomic chair. She hadn't heard him move. He was suddenly standing beside her desk, placing a heavy porcelain plate next to her keyboard. On it rested a perfectly seared, thick-cut Wagyu ribeye, a side of roasted asparagus, and a glass of deep red wine. "I didn't order this," Clara said, staring at the steam rising from the steak. "My private chef prepared it," Lucien replied, stepping back and leaning against the edge of her obsidian desk. "You are running on adrenaline and stale breakroom coffee. Human cognitive function degrades rapidly under caloric deficit. Eat. You need the iron." Clara hesitated, then picked up a silver fork. The meat was impossibly tender, melting on her tongue. It was, without a doubt, the best thing she had ever tasted. "Thank you," she mumbled around her first bite. "But I don't have time for a break. Victoria has locked down the commercial shipping lanes. She has moles in Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd. If we put the synthesized Vitae on standard commercial freighters, her boarding parties will hijack them before they clear the Strait of Gibraltar. Then we are out of options," Lucien said, a dangerous edge creeping into his tone. "If the European covens do not receive their shipment by Friday, they will experience withdrawal. They will break the treaties. They will hunt." "No, wait," Clara said, swallowing a sip of the wine. The vintage was incredibly smooth, warming her exhausted body. "Vampire law prevents Victoria from legally seizing assets entrusted to humans without declaring formal war, right?" "Correct," Lucian confirmed. "But out on the open ocean, she is masking her attacks as piracy, plausible deniability." "So we don't put it on the open ocean with private contractors," Clara said, her fingers flying back to the keyboard, pulling up international law databases. "We put it in the hands of the most untouchable human logistics network on the planet." She turned one of her monitors toward Lucienne. On the screen was the text of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, 1961. "Article 27, Clara recited, pointing to the highlighted text. "The diplomatic pouch shall not be opened or detained. A diplomatic courier shall be protected by the receiving state in the performance of his functions. He shall enjoy personal inviolability and shall not be liable to any form of arrest or detention. Lucien's golden eyes scanned the screen, his ancient mind processing the legal jargon instantly. You want to designate 400,000 liters of synthetic blood as diplomatic cargo? Exactly, Clara said, her exhaustion replaced by a surge of brilliant adrenaline. Croft Financial holds controlling shares in a massive philanthropic NGO based in Geneva, the Global Health Alliance. We transfer the title of the Hematech cargo to the GHA. We reclassify the Vitae as classified humanitarian medical relief. Then we charter private cargo planes, not ships. We use UN-registered diplomatic couriers to escort the pallets. Lucian stared at her, the silence stretching out for a long, heavy moment. If Victoria's vampires attack a UN-sanctioned diplomatic flight, Clara continued, her voice gaining confidence, they aren't just attacking Croft Financial. They are committing an act of international terrorism against the human governments of the world. The mortal military response would be immediate and overwhelming. It would break your masquerade, yes, but it would annihilate her faction instantly. Would she risk exposure to the United States military? No, Lucian whispered, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his flawless face. She is a coward at heart. She operates in the shadows because she fears the daylight of human retribution. She would never dare strike a heavily monitored diplomatic convoy. He reached out, his cold, powerful fingers gently gripping Clara's chin, tilting her face up to meet his burning gaze. The sheer intensity in his eyes made the breath catch in her throat. You are weaponizing human bureaucracy against a 500-year-old vampire? Lucian murmured, a profound sense of awe mingling with dark amusement in his voice. You are magnificent, Clara Hayes. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, entirely unrelated to the stress of the job. His touch was freezing, yet it sent a searing bolt of heat straight to her core. I'll need your digital signature to authorize the asset transfer to the GHA, Clara breathed. Unable to look away from him, Lucian released her chin, his fingertips trailing lightly down her jawline before he stepped back, leaving her skin tingling. Do it. Draft the transfer. I will sign whatever you put in front of me. For the next 2 hours, they worked in perfect, lethal synchronization. Clara drafted the digital bills of lading, established the routing protocols through Geneva, and initiated the encrypted transfer of the European supply chain. Lucian stood behind her, lending his biometric clearances, his presence a heavy, intoxicating shield against the crushing pressure of the night. By 2:45 a.m., the European blockade was effectively broken. The first wave of diplomatic flights was scheduled to leave Bucharest within the hour. Clara leaned back in her chair, a bone-deep sigh of relief escaping her lips. The routing is locked. European distribution is secure. Before Lucian could respond, a blaring crimson alarm suddenly flashed across all 4 of Clara's monitors. The ambient lighting in the 50th floor office shifted instantly from warm orange to a harsh, pulsating red. Lucian's demeanor changed in a fraction of a second. The corporate CEO vanished, replaced entirely by the apex predator. What is that? Clara asked, her heart jumping into her throat as she scrambled to read the incoming alert. A localized breach, Lucian snarled, leaning over the desk to look at the screen. Not Europe. Here, in Chicago. Clara read the flashing text. Flight 808 from our Montreal synthetic facility. It was carrying the localized reserve supply for the North American covens. It was supposed to be diverted to our private hangar at Midway, but it's been forcibly rerouted by air traffic control. It just touched down at O'Hare International Airport, Terminal 5 Cargo Bay. Victoria, Lucian said, his voice a lethal, vibrating hiss. She realizes she lost the European chess match. She is making a desperate play for the local supply to humiliate me in my own city. The cargo is sitting in a standard U.S. Customs holding bay, Clara said, panic rising. If Customs opens those containers and finds thousands of liters of unidentifiable blood, we're finished. Lucian turned away from the desk, striding toward a hidden panel in the mahogany wall. He pressed his palm against it, and the wall slid open to reveal a reinforced armory. Customs won't open it, because Victoria's lieutenants will compel the mortal agents to release the cargo directly to them, Lucian said, pulling a sleek matte black sidearm and sliding it into a shoulder holster. He turned back to Clara, his golden eyes flashing with violent promise. Grab your tablet, Ms. Hayes. You now hold the cryptographic keys for the diplomatic transfer. I cannot legally release that cargo from human customs without you. Me? Clara gasped, standing up so fast her chair rolled backward. You want me to go to O'Hare and fight vampires? You will not fight anyone, Lucien commanded, walking toward her and wrapping a heavy dark wool overcoat around her shoulders to protect her from the freezing night. You will point your tablet at the human customs agents and invoke federal law. If any of Victoria's parasites take a step toward you, he leaned in close, his fangs extending just enough to catch the red emergency lights. I will tear their heads from their shoulders. We are taking the helicopter. Move. The Croft Financial corporate helicopter tore through the violent Chicago winds, touching down on a private helipad near O'Hare International's Terminal 5 cargo bay. The sprawling expanse of concrete and steel smelled heavily of jet fuel and freezing rain. Lucien moved with terrifying speed through the labyrinth of shipping crates, his towering frame radiating coiled violence. Clara followed closely, clutching her encrypted tablet, flanked by 4 heavily armed Croft security contractors. Bay 42, Clara whispered, tracking the GPS. The Montreal shipment is there. They rounded a massive stack of timber and found them. 3 armored transport trucks idled near the temperature-controlled containers. Standing between the cargo and a terrified U.S. Customs and Border Protection supervisor were 4 figures in long, dark coats. The leader, a blonde vampire with cruel, angular features, was staring down the mortal agent. A faint, mesmerizing distortion rippled the air between them. You don't need to inspect these containers, Officer Miller, the vampire purred, his voice thick with compulsion. You have already cleared them. Sign the release manifest and walk away. Officer Miller blinked slowly, his eyes glazed. I have already cleared them. I will sign. Stop right there, Clara's voice echoed sharply through the cavernous bay. The blonde vampire whipped his head around, his eyes flashing a venomous green. Officer Miller snapped out of his trance, stumbling backward and dropping his pen. Lucien stepped out of the shadows, dropping the temperature in the bay by 10 degrees. The 4 rogue vampires instantly tensed, dropping into feral crouches with fangs extended. Gideon, Lucien rumbled, his voice vibrating off the steel walls. You are trespassing in my city. My sister has made you bold, but she has also made you stupid. Gideon bared his fangs, masking genuine terror with bravado. The old laws are changing, Croft. Victoria promises a return to the hunt. We won't survive on your synthetic slop. My synthetic supply is the only reason mortals haven't carpet-bombed your havens, Lucien replied coldly. You will not touch this shipment. Gideon sneered, turning his gaze to Clara. You brought a human pet to a blood feud? Pathetic. He snapped his attention back to the customs agent. Officer, release the cargo to me, now. Clara stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lucien's towering presence at her back was an anchor of absolute courage. She held up her tablet, displaying a blindingly bright federal release form, embedded with a Department of State seal. Officer Miller, Clara projected, using her sharpest corporate tone. I am Clara Hayes, Executive Liaison for the Global Health Alliance. These containers are classified under Title 22 of the United States Code as protected diplomatic cargo. This is your Article 27 release authorization. These men do not have clearance. If they attempt to load this cargo, you are to trigger a Level 1 federal security breach. Miller stared at the glowing tablet, then at the heavily armed Croft security team. His mortal training overrode the lingering vampire glamour. He grabbed his radio. Control, this is Miller at Bay 42. I have a diplomatic priority override, denying access to uncredentialed transport, requesting immediate backup. Gideon let out an ear-piercing, inhuman shriek. The bureaucratic block had shattered the operation. Without a legal customs release, taking the cargo meant slaughtering federal agents on camera, bringing the full, devastating wrath of the U.S. military down on Victoria's faction. Kill the human, Gideon roared, launching himself forward with blinding speed, claws aimed directly at Clara's throat. Clara didn't even have time to scream. The air cracked like thunder. Lucien moved faster than human biology could process. 1 second, he was behind her. The next, he had intercepted Gideon mid-air. Lucien's large hand clamped around Gideon's throat with the force of a hydraulic press, slamming the rogue vampire into the concrete floor with an impact that cracked the foundation. The other 3 rogues lunged. Lucien didn't draw a weapon. He became one. He caught the second vampire's arm, snapping it with a sickening crack, before hurling him into a transport truck. He backhanded the third with a strike so fast it created a shockwave, sending the vampire skidding unconscious across the tarmac. The 4th rogue immediately dropped to his knees and surrendered, trembling violently. The entire brutal exchange took less than 3 seconds. Officer Miller fell onto his backside in horror. The human security team quickly moved in, zip-tying the surviving rogues and dragging them into the shadows. Lucien stood slowly, brushing concrete dust from his black dress shirt. He ignored the broken vampires and locked his burning golden eyes onto Clara. The lethal predator faded, replaced by fiercely protective warmth. He walked back to her, his chest heaving slightly. "Are you unharmed?" Clara nodded, her hands shaking. "Yes, I'm okay." Lucien reached out, his cold fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "You didn't flinch," he murmured reverently. "You stood your ground against a monster, armed with nothing but a tablet and federal law?" "I knew you wouldn't let them touch me," Clara whispered. Lucien's eyes darkened with a dangerous, intoxicating possessiveness. "Never, Clara. You are mine to protect now." The Croft Financial corporate helicopter did not return to the main headquarters. Instead, it banked sharply over the Chicago River, heading toward the luxurious towers of the Langham, Chicago. The hotel's uppermost floors, inaccessible to mortal guests, housed the covert boardroom of the global syndicate, the ancient council of vampire oligarchs who oversaw the masquerade. The sun was an hour away from breaking over Lake Michigan, painting the eastern horizon in faint bruising shades of violet. Time was running out. "Victoria has called an emergency tribunal," Lucien explained, his voice completely devoid of emotion as the helicopter touched down on the reinforced roof. "She assumes Gideon succeeded at O'Hare. She believes the North American supply is compromised and the European supply is paralyzed. She is going to demand the syndicate strip me of my CEO title for gross negligence." Clara unbuckled her harness, her fingers still trembling from the adrenaline of the tarmac. "But we secured both. She has no leverage." "She has centuries of political manipulation," Lucien corrected, stepping out into the freezing wind and turning to offer Clara his hand. "And she hates humanity. The council is comprised of traditionalists. They will look for any excuse to remove the vampire who forces them to eat synthetic food from a laboratory." He led her through a heavily guarded private stairwell, down into the penthouse level. Two massive doors of solid oak, flanked by immortal guards in bespoke tuxedos, loomed ahead. "Stay close," Lucien murmured, his golden eyes burning with a dangerous, quiet intensity. "Do not speak unless I ask you a direct question. They are not as civilized as I am." The guards pushed the doors open. The penthouse boardroom was a staggering display of old-world wealth masquerading as corporate power. A long table carved from a single slab of black walnut dominated the space. Seated around it were 12 figures, men and women of terrifying, icy perfection. They wore designer suits and couture dresses, but their eyes held the predatory stillness of ancient beasts. Standing at the head of the table was Victoria Croft. She wore a breathtaking white silk suit, looking every inch the victorious queen. A triumphant smile played on her lips as Lucien entered, though her eyes narrowed slightly when she saw Clara, trailing just a step behind his broad shoulder. "Lucien," Victoria purred, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "How kind of you to join us. And you brought your little pet. How inappropriate." "State your grievance, Victoria," Lucien commanded, his voice a low, booming rumble that instantly silenced the murmurs of the ancient council. He did not sit. He stood at the opposite end of the table, an immovable pillar of dark authority. "My grievance is your catastrophic failure," Victoria declared, slamming her hands flat onto the walnut table. "Esteemed council, as of tonight, the European supply chain has collapsed, and just an hour ago, I received word that the North American Reserve shipment was violently compromised at O'Hare International Airport. A collective hiss of outrage echoed through the room. The vampires murmured in ancient dialects, their eyes flashing with hunger and panic. "Lucien's reliance on human bureaucracy has starved us," Victoria continued, her voice rising to a passionate crescendo. "He promised us discretion and stability through Croft Financial. Instead, we face famine. We must return to the old ways. We must take back our right to hunt, and it begins with removing my brother from power." The eldest council member, a man with silver hair and piercing grey eyes, stood up. "Is this true, Lucien? Are the shipments lost?" Lucien didn't look at the elder. He looked at Clara. He gave her a single, sharp nod. Clara stepped forward, stepping out from behind Lucien's massive shadow. The collective gaze of 12 ancient predators snapped to her. The sheer pressure of their combined attention was physically crushing, but Clara remembered the feel of Lucien's cold hand on her jaw. She squared her shoulders. She placed her encrypted tablet on the table and tapped a few keys, casting the display onto the massive smart screen on the boardroom wall. "The North American supply is entirely secure," Clara's voice rang out clear and steady, betraying none of her internal terror. "The cargo was intercepted by a rogue faction, but it was legally bound under Title 22 of the United States Code. The rogues have been apprehended, and the Vitae is currently en route to the Croft distribution centers under federal escort." Victoria's face drained of color. "Gideon," she whispered, realizing her lieutenant had failed. "Furthermore," Clara continued, pulling up a secondary map covered in green flight paths, originating from Geneva. The European supply chain has been fully restructured. We bypassed the commercial shipping lanes entirely. 400,000 liters of vitae are currently airborne on UN-sanctioned diplomatic flights chartered by the Global Health Alliance. They will land in Paris, London, and Berlin in 3 hours. The boardroom erupted into stunned, relieved whispers. Victoria's perfect white suit suddenly seemed too tight. She glared at Clara with naked, murderous hatred. "You lie! You cannot move that volume of cargo through diplomatic channels in a single night." "She didn't just move it," Lucian said, stepping forward, his golden eyes locking onto his sister. "She uncovered exactly why you were so desperate to intercept the shipments in the first place." Lucian looked at Clara again. "Show them the financial audit, Ms. Hayes." Clara swallowed hard and pulled up the final set of documents she had compiled during the helicopter ride. It was a dizzying array of offshore accounts and insurance claims. "While I was restructuring the routes, I cross-referenced the lost European shipments from the past 6 months," Clara explained to the council. "Ms. Croft claimed they were lost at sea, destroyed by human pirates, but the claims filed with Lloyd's of London showed no wreckage. I dug into the corporate shells holding Ms. Croft's private assets. The vitae wasn't lost." Clara highlighted a massive red ledger. "Ms. Croft has been selling the synthetic blood on the mortal black market to rogue biotech firms in Zurich and private military contractors in Eastern Europe. She wasn't starving you to start a war for vampire supremacy. She was starving you to amass a multi-billion-dollar mortal slush fund. She is funding human paramilitary groups to assassinate rival covens in Europe." The silence in the boardroom was absolute, brittle, and terrifying. "Treason!" the silver-haired elder whispered, his eyes flashing blood red as he glared at Victoria. "She is lying!" Victoria shrieked, the elegant facade shattering completely. "A human typing on a keyboard cannot unravel my network. Lucian fabricated this to frame me. The routing numbers match your private offshore accounts at Credit Suisse," Clara stated simply, tapping the screen. "The money trail is undeniable," Victoria snapped. The realization that her centuries-old empire of deception had been dismantled in a single night by a 26-year-old human from Chicago broke her mind. With an ear-splitting feral shriek, Victoria's fangs extended, her eyes turning entirely black. She vaulted over the massive walnut table, moving faster than a bullet, her diamond-sharp claws aimed directly at Clara's heart. Clara braced for impact, closing her eyes, but the impact never came. A deafening crash shook the penthouse. Clara opened her eyes to see Lucien standing directly in front of her. He had caught Victoria by the throat mid-air. The sheer kinetic force of his block had shattered the smart screen on the wall behind them. Lucien's aura was no longer that of a CEO. He was a creature of terrifying, mythological power. The ambient light in the room seemed to bend and warp around him. "You dare!" Lucien snarled, his voice vibrating with such ancient power that the heavy crystal glasses on the table shattered simultaneously. "You dare attempt to strike my liaison?" Victoria clawed frantically at his grip, choking, her feet kicking in the air. Lucien slammed her down onto the table, the black walnut splintering under her spine. He pinned her there, his burning, luminescent amber eyes boring into her terrified face. "You are stripped of your title," Lucien declared, his voice echoing with the weight of a royal decree. "You are stripped of your assets, your holdings, and your bloodline privileges. You will be escorted to the subterranean vaults beneath this city, where you will remain locked in darkness for the next century to think about your betrayal." He looked up at the council, who were all standing in stunned, fearful reverence. "Does anyone object?" Lucien asked softly. No one moved, no one breathed. Lucien signaled to his immortal guards. They rushed forward, hauling the broken, sobbing Victoria off the table and dragging her out of the penthouse. Lucien stood slowly, straightening his cuffs. He looked around the ruined boardroom, the absolute master of his domain, before turning his gaze back to Clara. The monstrous rage vanished from his face, replaced by a profound, reverent awe. "The tribunal is concluded," Lucien told the council, dismissing the most powerful beings in the world with a flick of his wrist. "Return to your cities. Your food will arrive on schedule." Without waiting for their response, he placed his hand gently on the small of Clara's back, guiding her out of the penthouse. They rode the private elevator in silence, but this time the tension wasn't suffocating. It was electric, heavy, intoxicating. When they stepped back into the sanctuary of the 50th floor of the Croft building, the first rays of the morning sun were piercing through the massive windows, painting the office in a warm, golden hue. The UV-treated glass kept the lethal radiation at bay, allowing the room to bathe in the dawn. Clara walked to her new obsidian desk, her legs suddenly feeling like lead. The adrenaline was finally leaving her system, leaving her exhausted and overwhelmed. "We did it," Clara whispered, looking at the monitors showing the UN flights safely in the air. "The supply chains are secure. Your father's medical debts are already paid," Lucian finished, stepping up behind her. "An anonymous donation was made to Northwestern Memorial Hospital 20 minutes ago. His entire experimental treatment program is fully funded." Clara spun around, tears finally welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Lucien. I don't know how I can ever repay you for that." Lucien stepped closer, entirely violating her personal space, trapping her gently between his massive frame and the desk. He reached up, his cold, strong fingers brushing the tears from her cheeks. "You already have, Clara," he murmured, his golden eyes softening into something deep, possessive, and impossibly tender. "For a century, I have surrounded myself with immortals who only sought to deceive me. Tonight, a mortal woman, with everything to lose, stood between me and ruin. You possess a brilliance and a loyalty my kind forgot millennia ago." Clara's breath hitched. She looked up at his flawless, aristocratic face, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. "I was just doing my job." "Your job," Lucian whispered, leaning down, his face mere inches from hers, "is to stand by my side, not just as a logistics coordinator, not just as an executive." He trailed his thumb across her lower lip, sending a searing jolt of electricity straight to her core. "I told my sister you were the only one staying," Lucian said, his voice dropping to a velvety, intoxicating purr. "I meant it permanently. Be my queen in the shadows, Clara. Rule this empire with me." Clara looked into his burning eyes, seeing the ancient, terrifying predator, but also the fiercely protective king who had shielded her from the dark. She reached up, her warm fingers tangling in the collar of his dark shirt. "I always did thrive under pressure, Mr. Croft," Clara breathed. Lucian smiled, a genuine, breathtaking smile, before he leaned down and captured her lips in a searing, possessive kiss that promised a dangerous, beautiful forever as the sun rose over Chicago. Clara went from facing the unemployment line to ruling a global supernatural empire, proving that sometimes the most terrifying bosses are the ones who recognize your true worth. What would you do if you found out your company was secretly feeding the vampire underworld? Let us know your survival strategy in the comments below. If you loved this paranormal romance thriller, please hit that like button, share it with your fellow dark romance fans, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling story. Until next time, keep your eyes on the shadows.